really do feel that I am just a glorified preschool teacher. I say things that should be common sense, right? That really you should have sort of gotten together or figured out by the time you left the first grade. And people are shocked, right? It's just not likely that every single person in America is a racist. There might be something else going on in this country. There might be a different reason people are turning to President Donald J. Trump. And you would be surprised, by the way. I mean, if you in your heart say, you know, things are getting really bad, it's worse on college campuses. You cannot imagine. I wasn't in college that long ago, and it is so bad. It was not like that when I was in college in 2010, right? It has gotten to the point where when I stand on stage, the first thing that I do on a college campus is I do a test just to figure out what planet I'm on. Just, you know, am I still on Earth? So I say, before we get started, I'm going to ask one question just to see where I'm at. How many people in this room think that America is a more racist country today than it was 60 years ago? At least 60% of the hands will go up on a college campus today. It's that ridiculous. And the questions they ask, I invite them to come to the front of the line. If they disagree, they all disagree. The questions that they ask, it's pointedly ridiculous. I'm bickering with children about how many genders there are. There's only 2. This shouldn't be a thing. This is crazy. There's 2. That is why I feel like a glorified first grade teacher. Only 2 genders. Men can't be women. Women can't be men. Not everybody's a racist. Everything can't be free, right? That's really a concept. If you turn to a first grader and you say, you know, how should the economy work? They'd say, well, everything should be free, right? And then you'd sit them down and you explain to the first grader why everything cannot be free. That is my job day in and day out. And what have I earned for doing that, for going around and trying to raise everybody else's children? What do I get for it? I get called, remarkably, a white supremacist. So then I have to explain to these children why black people can't be white supremacists. And their minds are blown. They're completely blown. I just explained to them, why would I want to help build a society that I can't live in, right? That's ridiculous. And overnight, you come out as a black person, you say that you're a conservative, and that's what happens. You get attacked. They tell you that you're not allowed to think differently because they have this idea. They're so not racist, liberals, white liberals, that they know exactly how every single black person needs to think. And they freak out if you don't think the way that they think you are allowed to think. I disagree with that. You know, what I've realized in going around and speaking to people is just that what liberals have done, you know, since the dawn of this country, is they've really just repurposed what they've done all along to black America. And that's what I've written in my book, which is coming out in April, which is called Blackout, and the subtitle is How Black America Can Make Their Second Escape from a Democrat Plantation. And when I got attacked for saying that phrase by the Washington Post, which nobody reads. Nobody reads it. They wrote this piece saying that it was so ridiculous I had popularized the phrase, you know, the Democrat plantation, calling it a plantation, how wrong it was that I did that. And they expected me to say, oh, you're right, I shouldn't use that language. No, I use that language. That's exactly what I meant. Let me explain that to you, what I mean. When I do my research and I understand and I look back at the time of slavery, to me, the Democrats have just modernized the exact same things that they were doing on the plantation. They just can't get away with it in the same way. You know, when I was reading Frederick Douglass's book and talking about what slavery was like for black Americans, what was crucial to it? First and foremost, the breakdown of family. To sustain slavery, there had to be a necessary breakdown of the family. There was a hopelessness that went with being a slave. They wanted you. They were constantly trading you. You weren't allowed to have a family unit. They didn't believe in the family whatsoever because they wanted people to work like machines. It was so integral. It was something also that the Democrats made necessary, was illiteracy. You were not allowed to read, learn how to read if you were a slave in America. It was actually so illegal that if you were a white person that was caught teaching a slave how to read, you were in trouble too. It was a severe law. And why is that? Because an educated mind can't be enslaved. So you might say, oh, but Candace, that's different now, because now black people are allowed to learn how to read. Right? You've got all these candidates talking about how they're going to save black America, and none of them are talking about the staggering illiteracy rates that are happening right now in inner cities. In California, 70% of black boys cannot pass a basic literacy exam. Okay? You're talking to me about white supremacy? My fear is liberal supremacy, because anywhere, show me any place where liberal policies reign supreme, and I will show you a place where the inner cities and the communities are broken, where the families are broken, and where people are feeling hopeless. So what I like to do whenever I get in front of an audience is tell you guys some real things about me, because you certainly won't find them on the internet. You will find absurd things about me as they try to destroy my character, and they don't want people to get into the room with me, because usually what I'm saying just makes sense, right? So let's smear her, let's libel her, let's make her seem that she's a self-hating black. You know, the truth is I'm a girl that came from absolutely nothing. You know, I did not have a family that, you know, had a bankroll for me that I could go out and I could spend their money. I grew up in a small roach-infested apartment with me and my two sisters. That's the truth of my situation and where I came from. You'll never find that on the internet because it's not interesting. They try to whitewash me. They say, oh, she's from Connecticut, so she must be wealthy. They don't know that there's poor places everywhere in the entire nation, right? I tell people, and just some fun facts about me. I was born in 1989. I was third in line in my family. I'm the third born. And I was born with a blocked tear duct. That's a true fact about me. And I could not cry for the first few weeks of my life. I couldn't produce tears. And I always tell people now that that was the earliest indication that I was not going to be a liberal. It's true. And a lot of people ask me, you know, where I get this strength and this character to come from, why I fight so hard, and why I don't really care, you know, what people say about me. Where did I learn that? And the truth is, I came out like that. I was always like that. When you watch videos of me when I was a kid, I just was one of those kids that knew what was what. And I was not intimidated by adults. I wanted answers all the time. I hated the manipulation that I felt would come from adults when they speak to children and try to oversimplify things. I was the kind of kid that when my parents said, Santa's not going to come if you don't clean your room, I would say, well, then tell him not to come. I need a better reason to clean my room than Santa's not going to come. So I was a precocious child. My parents always tell me I was extremely precocious, and they spent a lot of time frustrated and a lot of time laughing. And they received a blessing when I turned 5 because it was time to send me into the public school system, so I was no longer their problem for 7 hours a day. But I did become the problem for my teachers because I kept up more or less the exact same attitude. And I wanted to know, really, with teachers, I felt so early on that they weren't challenging me to think. They didn't want me to think. They wanted me to remember. And there was a test that I took that was on World War II, and my teacher, one of the questions was, why did America have to drop the bomb on Hiroshima? And everyone in my class just got around to answering the question, and my hand went up, and my teacher just went, oh, Candace, what could possibly be the problem? I always had my hand up. I always had an issue with the way they were teaching, you know? And I said, well, I don't like the way this question is phrased. Why did America have to drop the bomb on Hiroshima? Why don't you ask me, did America have to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, right? Slight difference, very important. You see, one, they're asking people to think critically to come up with the answers. The other, they're telling them the answer and forcing them to remember the reasons why. This is how the public school system and how the school system is designed today. They want children to remember. They want to indoctrinate them. They do not want them to learn how to think. And I will tell you this. My teachers did receive a blessing in high school because eventually it was time for me to go to college. And they didn't have to worry about the stress of me wanting to, constantly looking for a challenge and constantly wanting to think. And let me be clear, during this time, I was a liberal, if you had asked me. I wasn't really politically inclined. I guess technically I was apolitical, but if you had come up to me and you had asked me some questions about politics, I would have told you Republicans are racist, Democrats are the only way that black Americans should vote. Republicans want to send this country back to a time where people that have dark skin can't survive. These were the things that I didn't just choose to believe, but that I was conditioned to believe by the school system. One of the biggest battles that we are facing today, make no mistake, is to win the schools back. And if you think it's bad, you know, K through 12, it gets so much worse when you get into college. Really, I mean, I cannot describe to you how bad the universities have gotten. Think about this, you know, just a short while ago, the biggest class across college campuses was Western civilization, right? Like understanding why Western civilization is the best, why the West is the best, learning the history of Western civilization. And then Jesse Jackson led a group of protesters in Stanford, and they said, hey ho, Western Civ has got to go. And they referred to this course as racist, right? It's wrong to be celebrating Western civilization. This was sort of the beginning of teaching people, indoctrinating children and students to believe that there's something inherently wrong with being American. How weird. How weird that I can go onto a college campus today and students can break out and start chanting USA, USA, and other students will say that that chant is racist, that it's xenophobic, that there's something wrong with loving your country. When I was in university, we had to pick a course that we would select as an elective, which is ridiculous, that you were forced to pick either African American studies, which is basically a course in how to hate white people, gender studies, a course in how to, hate straight people, or you could pick feminism, which was a course in how to hate men, right? It was like pick your evil. It was one of the things that I had to pick. So I went with Feminism 101 because at that time, if you had asked me, I would have said I was a feminist. They sell it. It sounds so good the way they package things on the left, right? Who doesn't want to be a feminist? Who doesn't support women? So I said, I'll take this class. This is good. Send me to this class. And what a nightmare that ended up being for my professor. Not for me, but for her. Because my professor, I realized very quickly that the purpose of this course was not to empower women. The purpose of this course was to indoctrinate women to hate men. We had to get a textbook, and apparently this textbook had every problem that women have faced since the dawn of time. And the professor would stand in the front, and she would pick out a problem, and she would read the problem to the class and then ask us why, and the answer was always because of men. Didn't matter what it was. Why are women thirsty? Because of men, It does not matter. And the course would go on and on. She'd come in every day just explaining to us that men are the reason that everything is bad. And there was this one course, this one particular class that I will never forget because in the retrospect, it's so meaningful. At the time, it was less meaningful. She plucked out a problem in this class, and the problem was about eating disorders. And don't quote me on the exact number, but it was north of 80% of all eating disorders in America are had by women. Women have eating disorders. And then she turned to the class and she said, why? And the answer, of course, was because of men. Very simple. And I just thought to myself, maybe there's something else going on here, maybe not everything can be because of men. And she sort of launched into this diatribe about how the reason women feel like they have to be skinny is because of advertising agencies, which are owned by men, make us feel like we have to look this way. And I audibly chuckled in the middle of this class. I laughed. I thought this was funny. And she heard me and she turned around, and we had traded barbs for so many classes. And she just said, "What do you find funny about this?" And I said, "I just find it ridiculous that you look at this statistic without exploring any other statistic." And I asked her this question. I said, like, what is the statistic for how many people shoot up steroids so they can go to the gym and make themselves look big, right? Is that maybe 80% men that take those medicines, that take those steroids? And is that because of women? And she went, oh! It was like, no, that was just not what she wanted to hear. And what she said to me next, I will never forget. She went beet red and she was so angry, and she said, "Candace, I just feel like you were sent to me from the men's department." What a bizarre thing to say, right? And I said, "Professor, I just feel like I was sent to you from the common sense department. There might be something else going on." And we went back and we went forth and back and went forth until finally I cut off the conversation and I said to her, I said, "You want to know why I find this to be so ridiculous?" It was because as I was sitting in her classroom as a 19-year-old girl, I had an eating disorder. Many of you guys who follow my story know I talk about this a lot, especially to young women, because I had an eating disorder for 4 years of my life, and it was the worst when I was in university. And I laughed because I was sitting here listening to a woman that was teaching me that it was because of men, and because I felt the need to look skinny in front of men when it wasn't. It had nothing to do with men. When I suffered with anorexia, it had to do with control. I felt like my life had spiraled out of control, and this counting of calories was something that I could do, that I could control something. That was the reason why. It had nothing to even do with wanting to look skinny. I've been skinny my whole life, but there was this mechanism. And yet here she was teaching me, not asking anybody. She never asked once to women to talk about their experiences. She was teaching us that it was because of men. And it was fascinating. And why I say that this was such a moment for me in the retrospect, because when I think back to that moment, what was happening between me and that teacher, me and that professor, is the difference between liberalism and conservatism. You see, liberals, when they have a problem, they look out externally. They say, who can I blame? If I'm short, it's because of tall people. If I'm poor, it's because of rich people, right? This is the way they think. But conservatives, we do something weird, totally weird and foreign, right? We look inward. We look internally. We say, I have a problem, and now I need to fix it. Beyond that, you know, I had to drop out of school because Sally Mae declined my loan in the 4th year, is when they had the big collapse. So imagine being me, over $100,000 in student loans, and I can't finish, but I got to start paying them back in 6 months, right? So I had to drop out of school, hit the ground running, figuring out how I was going to pay them back, which I did, Bernie Sanders, without stealing from anybody else. I really wish they would do that, student loan forgiveness. I would be so angry, so angry. You know, you make a decision, you pay for it, not everybody else. And as I was working to pay back these loans, I started working in private equity for a few years. And, you know, I never really cared about politics. I never thought about my life in the context of politics until an event happened in the world, and a man by the name of Donald J. Trump came down the escalator. And whether you were politically inclined or you weren't paying attention to politics, you paid attention to politics on that day. It was impossible to ignore that man, for better or for worse. For me, it was for worse, as I said, oh, come on, this guy can't be the president of the United States. It's ridiculous. He's the guy that says you're fired. I remember thinking, he would make a mockery of the White House, you know, that this man should not become the President of the United States, and I didn't feel good about it. But I always say, and it's fine, me and him are friends now, we talk about that. What I always say, though, what was remarkable is that while I didn't think that he was equipped, I didn't think he had the experience, what was more important were the things that I never thought during that time. Not once did I say to myself, he shouldn't be the president because he's a racist. And yet overnight, this man, who nobody had an issue with, he was on the main stage for decades, a celebrity for decades. Overnight, I watched the left call this man a racist, a sexist, a misogynist. At one point, they even called him incestuous and said that he had feelings for Ivanka. Do you remember that? That sick story that went out? Overnight. And that's how I got started, because the left overplayed their hand. That was it. Because I said to myself, something's not right. So fast, so swift, and they're calling him all of these names. And I asked myself a most important question. I said, is it plausible that racism is now being used as a theme to turn black people into single-issue voters? Is it plausible that sexism is now being used as a theme to turn women into single-issue voters? And of course, the answer was yes. So I had the idea, I said, now that I know this information, I began reading and just reading and listening to voices that I had never listened to before. Dr. Thomas Sowell, Dr. Ben Carson, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, heroes in the black community, and so disrespected, so disrespected. I started reading their books and I suddenly felt like I was awake. Like I had been sleeping my entire life, like I had been lied to my entire life, like I had been convinced to see myself as a victim. I had been manipulated, and I knew instantly that I had to get into this. I had no plan, but I knew, and I knew the odds were going to be against me. I knew it was going to be an uphill climb, but I knew that something had to be done, and that now that I had this truth, it wasn't enough to know it. I had to share it, and you know, my big idea was to launch a YouTube channel. And fortunately for me, you know, my third video, and thanks to people like you in this room, went trending worldwide with 26 million views. That video was a video of me ranting, because you will remember after Donald J. Trump became the President of the United States, very shortly thereafter, the Charlottesville debacle happened. And that was unbelievable. Unbelievable, because I came home and my cousin was watching CNN, and I was just picking it up in the background. And CNN, if you were watching it, they were trying to convince me as a black American that the KKK was now alive and well because Donald J. Trump got elected, right? Like, we told you this would happen, and now it's here. They're back, right? People are riding in horses, and this is it. And I got so angry, and I started ranting for 4 minutes on my computer, and I'll tell you where this anger came from. The worst thing that the left does is that they cheapen evil. They cheapen real evil, right? And I was angry because when they started talking and trying to say that the Ku Klux Klan was alive and well, they were cheapening the real experiences that my ancestors lived through. They were cheapening it. And when I say my ancestors, I don't mean long dead ancestors. I mean my grandfather, who's still breathing, who grew up with the real Ku Klux Klan in a segregated South. They cheapened that experience. And these stories were so real to me growing up. To have my grandfather around the dinner table explain to us that he grew up with the real Ku Klux Klan, that when he was a kid, they would come by his home and they would spray bullets. And what's remarkable about that is that my grandfather, when he tells that story, he doesn't tell it like a victim. He tells it with a sense of power. He says, and my daddy would grab the shotgun and shoot back at them boys. That strength, that power, never a victim, segregated South. I've never heard my grandfather ever, growing up in his home, ever utter a bad word about a white person, ever. He would just say it was a different time. And he worked his entire life. His first job in the segregated South when he was 5 years old, laying out tobacco to dry, picking cotton on a sharecropping farm. This was what my grandfather had to do, right? This was his day in and day out. And now I look around and I see all these little victims who wouldn't know a hard day of work if it jumped up and punched them in the face. Most of you, know my grandfather. I know in California, you probably saw him sitting behind me when a certain loser named Ted Lieu, right, decided to play a tape when I was sitting in the House Judiciary Committee. My grandfather is easily the closest person to me. I love him so much. And I feel that everything that he lived through was to give me this experience to go through life, not as a victim, but as a part of this society. And to know that, after raising his kids in the North, my grandfather returned back to the South with my grandmother to retire, and he purchased the sharecropping farm that he grew up on. He was able to live that life because he made good decisions. That was it. Not because he cried, not because he protested when something bad happened, not because he was shrieking in the streets, not because he was demanding handouts. He was able to do that because of the American dream, and because that is what is on the line. That's what I fight to protect, right? That's why I launched Blexit, the Blexit organization, the black exit from this liberal ideology, which has become a cancer. It is a cancer. Liberalism is a cancer because it destroys lives. When you accept yourself and see yourself as a victim, like my granddaddy always says, if you believe you can't, you won't. It's that easy. A society now that wants to turn everybody into victims is a society that is telling and convincing people they can't before they even try. It's a society that is making people see themselves as the little man and not letting them know that in America, it's always been this. If you work hard, if you stay out of trouble, if you stop making excuses, this country will reward you. My call to action for every single person in this room is to, first and foremost, just know what's on the line. Because we've never dealt with this in this country, right? This is different. I say this is World War III. It might not feel like we're fighting a war, right? It might not feel that way, but we are. The war is ideological. We are right now deciding on what is going to happen in this country. Are we going to move towards a socialist country where everybody is a victim and nobody wins and everybody's miserable? Or are we going to move into the direction of what this country has always been, a country built on principle, on free markets, on capitalism, right? For me, I spend day in and day out fighting for Black America because I know that if Black America wakes up and understands what the left has done, not just what they've done, but what they continue to take from us, what they have taken from Black Americans since we've gotten to this country in 1619. Democrats only, Democrats ever, since the beginning of the time that Black Americans have been in this country. It has been Democrats. I believe if Black America wakes up, this country will be saved. I believe it's that simple, right? Because they've used us as their victims for so long. They've used us as their shield. As they gain power and we get nothing. Nothing. 60 years of bad policies, 60 years of our families being destroyed, of our men going to prison. The question that Donald Trump asked in Michigan in 2015 was a good one. What do you have to lose? The answer is nothing. I will wrap up just by saying, from the bottom of my heart, I am here, as a girl that came from nothing and on this stage because of each and every one of you that is in this room. I'm here because I've got the character of my grandfather and the support of patriots all around this country.